All right. Welcome, everybody, to our next installment of Are You Aware podcast with the ladies from Aware Consulting Group.
Hey.
Hey. Today we're talking about trauma, and Dr. Gabor Mate is somebody that we look up to and we think is great. And one of the things that he said was that he believed that trauma may be the core source of all suffering, and so that is our highlight today. Trauma may be the source of all human suffering, and I believe that.
We certainly will have a stimulating discussion around this stuff. We have an epidemic of trauma that is worldwide, and it is rooted in things like poverty and violence and chronic illness, including addiction.
Absolutely.
This should be a pretty interesting conversation.
Yeah.
And
can we do our aware highlight?
Let's kick off with our aware highlight.
Yes. So our aware highlight today, we're really excited about Rebirth Magazine, a recovery magazine put together by a woman named Amanda Esquivel. And I'm just going to read her bio really quickly. Side note, I don't like to read in public, so this is a big deal. So showing vulnerability is really important. And if we're going to ask others to do it, we do it as well. All right. So our aware highlight for today, I'm really excited about. It's about a woman named Amanda Esquivel. And Amanda is a full-time graphic design student at Portland State University, as well as a mentor at 4D Recovery Center. Amanda works directly with the LGBTQ community and works on expanding recovery pathways and services. Her senior project, Rebirth Magazine, focuses on recording the oral history of addicts that have found recovery and shares the hope and success that they have found. Rebirth Magazine will be available throughout Portland in February, and it's getting ready to come out. This project was created to share hope to those addicts or individuals suffering through addiction and still in active addiction, and those in institutions that do not have access recovery content. Future magazine to come. Pretty exciting. Wow. And who's in the magazine?
We are.
Yes. Yes.
So,
and it's amazing.
It is amazing.
Yes, we've had the privilege of having a little preliminary glance at the magazine. Wow.
Totally.
Wow. Unbelievable. Mm-hmm. Yeah. For college graduation project, senior project. Wow.
Well, and it was awesome because when she, initially reached out to us, she basically said that, there's recovery magazines out there, but that she just never saw one that was like the style she likes and the photography she likes and the colors. They're bold and
Something
vibrant.
that spoke to her.
Edgy.
Yes, of course, progressive.
So she wanted to create something different. And she reached out to us to be a part of it. And we're going to support her to try to make this happen all the time so that, Rebirth Magazine's a big deal out here. So that's exciting.
Periodical.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we know so many of the people in it.
So
and
many.
When I was flipping through, I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
So exciting. And a lot of really young people, which is so amazing because I think that, drug use and that in itself, the epidemic of our society and people on drugs and the young people. And I was one of those young people. You were one of those young people. And to have something very, very kind of edgy and kind of like really cool looking. And you've got some tattoo
it's representative.
sections. You've got it all.
Yeah. I love that.
Representing everyone. So.
Yeah.
Heck yeah. Well, I can't wait to have it in our hands.
I know.
And, be able to look at it. Yes.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. Yes. Congratulations. Yes. That is really an amazing senior project.
Yeah. Great job, Amanda. You rock.
Good job, girl.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm. Just the beginning.
Yep. Just the beginning of mad changes.
Just the beginning.
I love it.
Well, trauma, guys.
Yeah.
Trauma. Very prevalent.
Yep.
Still very misunderstood.
Yeah.
Still very misunderstood.
Totally.
People have this sense that it's, just something bad that happens. Well, we know it's just so very much more than that. It's a combination of your personal experiences, events that happen around you, your genetics.
Yeah, totally.
All of these things can affect your ability to respond to an experience in a healthy way or in a way that might put you at risk of some dysfunction of your autonomic nervous system that can be very unhealthy.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you mentioned the word prevalent because, that's one of the, SAMHSA's trauma-informed care principles is prevalence. And, Angel and I deliver a lot of trainings regarding trauma-aware care, trauma awareness. And one of the examples that we use is just like, they say, recognize that it's prevalent. We say like, recognize that any person, like when nobody's walking around with a big blinking sign on their forehead that says, I have trauma. So recognize that every single person that you come in contact may or probably does have something. Right. And so handling all people in a trauma aware way, despite what you're doing. I mean, we talk about the cashier who's fumbling over the change. You're in a hurry and you're going to be late and this cashier is fumbling over the change, making you late and you're frustrated. Taking that second to say, you know what, I don't know where she slept last night. I don't know what kind of relationships she's in that could be, tumultuous. And so just recognizing that every single person probably has it and treat people in a way that is trauma aware.
Yes. And in fact, that major study that the Kaiser Foundation, working in combination with another organization, I think, had 17,000 participants, I think.
Wow.
It came out about 20 years ago, but they were looking at the acute childhood events, so the ACEs that can set folks up for anything from a risk of addiction to anxiety and depression to diminished life expectancy if enough of those acute childhood events or traumatic events happen in childhood. But they found that 2/3 of those 17,000 people had at least one acute childhood trauma. 2/3. And so you can imagine once we get into adulthood, it's pretty much accepted to think that everybody has something. And that has been my experience from the family medicine and addiction medicine perspective. There's not a single person that you meet that if you talk to them long enough, they will tell you something that has really affected them in a significant way in which they weren't quite prepared to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Or there wasn't the right support in place to help them deal with it, wherever it did happen, at work, at school, within your own family.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's diminishing that trust, right? Like whether it's trust in systems or trust in your parents, or who didn't protect you, the teacher you told, and nothing happened. It's like diminishing that trust in everything, in others, because of that fear in your body. And it's a physiological response, right? We know that. It's all about our biology and what's happening with our amygdala, that creates that imprint, that stays potentially forever. And not that it's, trauma can't be healed, but it's work, it takes time and it takes trust and it takes, vulnerability.
It takes deep self-awareness as well. And I think that that's one of the things that we bring to from a unique perspective in all of that we're doing in our trainings and our technical assistance, et cetera, is that we're helping, corporations, their staff, clinicians, and beyond, start to go inward and recognize, the self-awareness that they need to have when they're engaging with the people that they're interacting with, whomever it is, whether it's, a psychiatrist with somebody coming to see them, or a parent, or a teacher, or a first responder, or a police officer, right? To have that deep self-awareness that then allows them to recognize their bias assumptions and their own traumas. We're looking at vicarious trauma in a lot of these roles that people are getting burnout or they're becoming traumatized just by being service providers or, first responders or even law enforcement. And so going deeply inward to recognize their self-awareness, which we call trauma awareness. And then so that's the internal process for the external practice. So then they can think about from a lens of, oh, well, maybe someone at the cash register is experiencing something. But if I'm reactive because I'm like stressed out and I might be engaging with somebody that specifically maybe activates my own traumas, then I'm going to be reactive rather than responsive. And we just watched a video that was talked about. It was this teacher that created a video for other teachers to try to better understand a survival brain that's in trauma activation
I
and
love
a
that
learning
video.
brain. And especially young people or, in school, if they're in survival brain, they're not learning, and we expect them to go into these boxes or fulfill these, requirements of this educational system or this, this module or whatever it is in school. And if they're in survival brain, they're not processing the same way as if they're in feeling safe
Learning brain.
and safe and supported in a learning brain. We'll make sure to add that link
Yeah.
I put
Yeah.
here
Definitely.
for our listeners. Yeah.
Something else, I'm glad that you said that because, just where I was working, back in October, 400 active clients that I was working with, lots of people that were going through different stages, of trauma and survival and all of these things. And when you think about it, systems that are like compliance driven and, people are coming in late and they're saying, hey, sorry, we can't serve you. You're 10 minutes late. Some of these kind of things, I want to recognize like there are policies and all of these things for a reason, but how are you supposed to learn when you're in survival mode? So just like a kid who can't, learn the same in school because of they're in survival mode, it's the same with these adults who are coming into this programming. And, people get frustrated and they're like, man, I've told him 10 times to put that card in his back pocket. He forgets every single time. Okay, he's in survival brain. That's why that card in his back pocket means shit to him. Right?
Yes.
Because he's worried about where he's going to sleep or what he's going to eat.
Yes. How he's
in survival
right.
mode.
Or how he's going to go home and actually be safe for the first time or ever, right?
It's hard to heal from something when you're actively being traumatized.
Well, and I think another big stigma or core belief out there in society is when people are experiencing something really big that they don't, that I myself might not understand. If I don't have the awareness that trauma might be present, I'm going to treat this as a problem and something to fear, rather than come from a place of curiosity and try to seek to understand and empathize and nurture the moment of this person's big experience, whatever that experience looks like. And what I've often seen is people focus on, well, the surface rather than the ingredients, but oh shit, I was thinking of something and I lost it as I was going, but I'm going to have it in a moment. Oh, no, we don't need a pause because it is now back. Okay.
Hello.
Holla. For example, if somebody is say a left brain type of individual and operates predominantly from the left brain, and then something big happens, and then now you're interacting with them and you notice that they're totally different, and maybe they're more right brain or maybe both, very different way of interacting with them. Well, think about it in the terms of your corpus callosum. And so your corpus callosum in the back of your brain, I went to this workshop years ago that taught us that the corpus callosum is what separates the left and the right brain. And when trauma happens, it literally slices it and scars it and interferes with the way your brain was currently being used. And it makes so much sense to me back then. I was like, well, no wonder, if people start to hear things or see things that others don't after something traumatic has happened, it could be decades later, like Eleanor Longden's TED Talk, or it could happen really quickly. And what they were able to see back then, I wish I could find the study because I know that they were doing a long-term study, but back then, what they were able to see is that it is healable. Your corpus callosum is healable, but it took a long time. And so then that's one of the things that helped me in my own wellness journey to start to identify trauma anniversary dates and then look at like how did I used to think as a child and over time when more cumulative traumas happened and how my brain shifted and how I started to see the world very differently. It makes a lot of sense. Well, in my wellness journey now, I was able to start putting together like a life history map back then, this is probably 15 years ago, and be able to start to recognize, well, no wonder I go in really dark places mentally and emotionally around November, December, and January, because I had compiled cumulative traumas around that time. But I was diagnosed with depression, and I wasn't depressed. I was responding to an insane situation and a sane response to that, right? And it was patterned, and it was my body's natural way of surviving. And so, in our addiction community, often I'm having conversations with people that don't even they're not even talked to about trauma. They're just disease model, right? You're sick, you're broken, you can never do this again. Well, the reality,
unless you take this pill,
for the rest of your life, right? And then some even say don't even take pills, right? So just last night having that conversation about trauma, and because there was a lot of just conversations that I was just like, well, and I have a different perspective, and had to just say it, like, y'all have some strong core beliefs that are from a certain type of recovery model that I don't believe anymore. And let's talk about trauma.
Yeah, can you say more about that?
Yeah. So I think, well, even in our society, the way the addiction recovery community really puts an emphasis on a disease, that if you have been using drugs X amount of years or whatever, and then it becomes habitual, and then you have this thing that they call addiction, and now you're an addict, and you're a lifelong addict, and you will be an addict for the rest of your life because you have this brain disease, and this brain disease therefore is unfixable. There's no real cure. Well, I don't necessarily personally ascribe to the disease model, because I understand that we're all very different. We've talked about this before. Recovery is unique. It is individualized to the person. And how do we start educating those who are in these rooms and those who are in these roles of supporters, recovery mentors, CADCs, and beyond, about trauma? Let's dive into that. And physicians too. Really talking about it in that way. Yes, you're listening.
Absolutely.
I love you.
And it brings us, back to that, like, trauma-informed care versus trauma-aware care, right? It's about what's going on inside of you in that moment. And maybe it's burnout, maybe it's compassion fatigue, maybe, you've got your own stuff, and this person activates you. A good example is, disrespect for me is something that's like a high activator. Even today, I got, 20 years of recovery under my belt. But when somebody talks to me disrespectfully, I feel like I puff up. Like, what did you just say to me? Like, that's an activator for me. And so when I'm working with individuals who are houseless, having a hard time getting services, can't get in anywhere, all of this frustration, anger is a pretty common place for them. So when you're talking to somebody and they're starting to get a little more ramped and a little more heated and angry, that's when I have to be self-aware and be like, okay, Fawn, he's not talking about you directly. Don't take this personal. Yes, he's talking about your clinic or wherever you work and the friends and your friends potentially, that you work with. But no matter what, having to take myself to a place of no activation so that I can respond rather than react in that moment with that person who clearly is heightened for a reason, because everything that they're dealing with in their life is really, really hard.
Yeah, very challenging.
And to even add to that, so you used language. So this is what we talk about being surface interpreted language. So when I say respect, what does respect look like to me? That's getting into the layers below the language that we're using. And when you say respect, you're going to say what it looks like. And that's the self-awareness, because if we're just saying disrespected, we don't know what that means to each other, right? And we don't know where the significant hot buttons or the big
big triggers,
activations
big T's
are,
and little T's.
yeah.
Yep, so just feeling comfortable having these conversations and getting to know the people that you're working with. And,
Oh, and insurance companies don't necessarily allow physicians or providers to sit with them for more than 15 minutes,
that's
right?
Well, yeah, they like to make money. They like to make money.
So Dr. Dan Siegel talks about that lid flip.
Yeah.
And so you can literally recognize when your prefrontal cortex is going to flip and that disengages. And that's when you've been activated. He calls it, it's not disengaged, but just anyway, I'm saying
a lid flip.
It's a lid flip. Yeah. And he does his hand brain model. So
and that's how we talk about it with our friends, with our kids.
My lid's about to flip.
Yeah, because it helps them to remember that that's actually what's happening is an actual disconnect.
Yeah.
Of
your
the prefrontal cortex.
autonomic nervous system. Yes, not functioning normally, not a place where you feel safe, not a place where you're able to learn, not a place where you're able to heal.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah. Is this a good time to maybe we can critique that comment?
Yes, there's a comment that's about to make my lid flip.
Well, I don't want to do that.
No, I'm kidding.
But there's this excellent podcast that I listened to, and General Stanley McChrystal, who's a 5-star general, had a long history with the U.S. military service, and came from a long line of people in his family who worked in the military. But the population of veterans is a group of people that suffers disproportionately with some of the things that we are concerned with, particularly issues around trauma. And I think because of the people, because there isn't a draft, and it's a self-selection process of who, well, not really a self-selection process. I mean, of people who go into the military. I mean, they do tend to be disproportionately of lower socioeconomic status, and generally people of color more often than not. But these are folks that we might consider just because of those are risk factors too for, again, having the experience of trauma. So no matter what happens, it's not what happens to you, but it's how you experience it. So I was rather disappointed, actually, when General McChrystal was asked what his thoughts and feelings were about trauma, and is it something that we should just suppress, said the interviewer, or do you think everybody should get therapy? And in his response, he says, I don't agree with suppression because there are some people out there who have real trauma, but I will be honest with you. I also think if you go looking for trauma long enough, you'll find it, meaning whether it's there or not, you can almost create it by looking for trauma and telling people, you must be traumatized because you went through this. Then after a while, they go, oh, I must be traumatized. And it almost becomes self-fulfilling. It really hurt me to hear that. Then he says, having said that, I think that a lot of people have gone through a lot, and what they need to do is understand that anyone who goes through combat comes out differently. They don't come out worse. Trauma doesn't always produce weakness. It doesn't produce flaws. It may produce a little bit more resilience. It may produce a little bit more maturity. These are competing things. But I don't like the idea of suppression because that's unhealthy. But at the same time, we don't want to look at every veteran as a victim or a casualty. Yes, so, I mean, as much excellent work as he's done, I do think it was important to recognize that this is grossly misunderstands the whole nature of trauma as something bad happening. Well,
the only part I do agree with is the resilience factor. Yes, we all are very resilient and we are very tough, like we come out of that. We, in the mind of somebody who's gone through trauma, you have just survived something amazing, and especially, a veteran, who's putting their life on the line, for our country.
Talk about a lid flip. Wow.
But broken and tough as hell.
Right.
We're broken and tough as hell, and that's the sad part, is that in order for trauma to really be reconciled, it should be reconciled in the moment. Whatever it was that happened, needs to be processed now. You need to be able to talk about it, have feelings that are validated, get it out of your brain and your body, in the moment. And then long-term term healing revolving around triggers and activations and, all of these things. But that is what settles it into our core, is that it isn't dealt with.
Right.
And systems or people or whatever aren't dealing with it. And so it either continues to happen, or B, is just not validated. You don't feel heard, you don't feel seen. And you don't feel like anybody really cared enough to stop what was happening or do something about it.
Yeah. Or even have the proper training going into something like that.
Totally.
Yeah. And recognizing that this is potentially a very vulnerable group of people. I mean,
right.
people
or a
starting
very
in the
dangerous
military
situation.
are teenagers. They're teenagers.
Yep.
They're teenagers.
Well, and they're meant to break you down and rebuild you for their purpose in the military, right? Well, and that piece that's in there, if you look hard enough, you're going to find it, and I'm like, what, I just call bullshit on that, because actually I think everybody on this planet in one way or another has some sort of trauma. It's just whether or not it is really affected in a difficult way in their lives. Some block it out, don't even know it's there, push it down, but they adapt because our human bodies are resilient and are naturally
survival instincts,
creating survival mechanisms. And some might be, I think about like the diagnosis OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. Well, I think about that. Well, if somebody's very focused on something being very specifically in their lives a certain way, makes me curious. Well, what is it that led to that, right?
Are they coping?
Are they coping or relationships or hidden traumas? Like people sometimes don't even know that they have trauma, but their bodies and their minds have adapted later or through other ways of operating in the world. And I was 24 years old and never heard the word trauma. And then I got into my therapy and started learning about all of the things that I experienced that I thought were normal experiences, because my community and my household had a lot of this stuff, and whether it was traumatic to my siblings or not is irrelevant. I believed it was a normal environment. So leaving home at 16, I'm out there looking for, the Cosby Show family or the 8 is enough, because I'm seeing this image thinking that's what I want. This is my normal, but I want something like that. And so leaving home, seeking some sort of something, not knowing. And then therapy taught me that, actually, Angel, this was of my own, awareness, recognizing that it wasn't normal to have some of these things going on in my household that were just really just sibling stuff, right? That could not, nobody would have known that these siblings, were traumatizing each other, right? And then the community in which we lived was traumatic, which added stress, which then there was more internal traumatizing in the household. Who would have known that? Well, no wonder
and when all of your neighbors, they all look exactly the same. Everybody's got chaos.
Everybody's got a hot mess
Nobody
going
thinks
on.
It's traumatic. It's just normal. It's, where you grew up. You
it's
don't
like
think about
survival
that.
mode.
It's survival
growing
mode.
up in survival mode. Growing up in survival mode. Very challenging.
Yeah.
Very
it's like
challenging.
5 people seeing the same car accident. You're going to have 5 interpretations of what it means to you. And so, it might be traumatic to, 4 of them. It might be to 1, but it still is different based on each individual and their perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it makes a lot of sense why people use drugs, right? To escape emotional pain, mental pain, whatever, and then become dependent on it.
Yeah. I mean, it's impossible to maintain for many people, just impossible to maintain that degree of lid flip, ongoing over and over and over again.
Oh yeah, for
day
sure.
In,
For
day
days,
out,
months, years.
Yeah. It's so incredibly stressful. The hormones are bad for you. The hormones that go along with that neurological state. Yeah.
Well, here's an example of resilience, right? That actually turned out to be something that likely saved my life the rest of my life. I was almost kidnapped twice, once in the fifth grade and once in the 8th grade, 2 different times, 2 different experiences, walking alone by myself. And I intuitively felt something was not right before. And so I was able to prevent that. I ran, I screamed, the whole bit. One was caught by the police, one was not until years later. That being said, the rest of my life, I was hyper alert around me, and living on the streets at 16, from park benches to penthouses, it saved my life. One time I went against my intuition and my hypersensitivity, and my daughter and I were taken for a week. But that being said, it could have happened any number of times for years, living in that lifestyle. So that's resilience.
That's the resilience.
How do we take the gifts from what has happened to us and honor the difficult times of it, help people recognize it and be able to see the strengths around it.
Yes, I really like that idea of honoring people's experiences, people's individual experiences, and how it has changed them and shaped them. And
Yes. Well, and I have kind of like iffy things about it sometimes, as a person who has a lot of trauma, who also has children, because of that kind of stuff. I was a hyper vigilant, parent. And so luckily I have 5 kids that, I think they would all say that the most traumatic thing was like me in a tangent screaming and, slamming dishes in the kitchen, which I'm sorry, ladies. But, that, they didn't have the extent of, anybody else, luckily. But because of that, I was so hyper vigilant that it was like I was almost traumatizing them. Like they would ask if they could, go around the block to play at a friend's, and it's dusk. And in my mind, once it's dark, now there's more danger. Now somebody, nobody's going to seize, somebody if they try to grab you, all these things. And so my poor Riley, she would go to play at her friend Ava's around the block, and she'd say, "Please, can I go?" And I'm like, "No, it's dark. You're not going anywhere." And she'd say, "Mom, I'll sprint." And I would literally make her sprint a block and a half around the corner and call me when she got there.
All out of
my
breath.
Friends. Oh yeah, totally. Hi, I'm here.
Sweating.
Yeah, totally. And my friends were like, "What is going on with you? Are you okay?" But in my mind, I was just doing everything in my power to protect them from ever having to heal from the things that I had to heal from.
Yeah, you must live in Southeast Portland. No, I'm just
Grand Rapids, Michigan. Shout out. No, not a shout out. But but true.
I live in Southeast. No offense to Southeast Portland.
But it's interesting.
Hey, my first home was in Southeast.
Totally.
Yes, very interesting. So how do we use that experience to help others heal? While we're doing our deep dive into trauma, you guys, I made it all the way through my medical school training and residency without learning about trauma.
How long is
that?
Thinking
about that. So 4 years of school and 3 years of residency, family medicine residency.
7 years.
I've been thinking about it a lot actually in preparation for this discussion. And I just don't think we ever talked about it. And, we had probably one of the top family medicine residencies in the country out here.
That's
and very progressive. Well, yes, but, driven by the trifecta, right? Pharmaceutical companies, healthcare corporations, and the insurance companies. We're really just trying to get our feet under us, I think, with respect to this idea of trauma and healing. And why is it important? Because nobody's getting better, guys.
Right. Hello. Nobody's getting better because we're not addressing it.
No, we're not.
And we're just trying to give it a Band-Aid or a pill to fix something.
A prescription.
That's how I look at it too.
We're not here to be fixed.
Like, here's a Band-Aid for your houselessness. Here's a Band-Aid for your addiction. Here's your Band-Aid, for this. When it's like, if you would just spend your money and time in putting into this person to make them feel cared about and make them feel, trust, they're going to divulge a lot. And just being heard You know, just being able for somebody to hear you and stick up for you, you know, and all those kind of things. There's something.
And validate you. Even if
you
you don't understand or agree, validate their experience like wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And when you say, make them feel this way or make them X, you know, the how around that.
It's like make you
you got to be aware of your stuff
Yeah.
in order. And then you also got to be able to be willing to be vulnerable and say, some things really just happen. And what would it look like for you if in a perfect world, what would safety look like for you right in this moment? And don't assume you know what safety, because we can't create a safe space for anyone. We often say that, like, this is a safe space where we no, that's might be safe for you, but it may not be safe for the other individual. So really collectively creating brave spaces that allows for people then to evolve into feeling safe, because they're not necessarily going to feel safe right away, you know, and we make a lot of assumptions about what we think is helpful, and which is part of our system's problem, is we come from a dominant culture of saying this is what helps, rather than coming from a place of, here, let me learn with you, and we can create something together that then can be mutually helpful. If I have this role, I've got to do these things because the powers say I have to, and you have certain needs. Maybe you don't want to do what they're saying you have to do. They want you to do that's helpful, but how can we negotiate that together and co-create a space that is safe to then walk alongside, right? I mean, because we don't give people the time to walk with people. We don't give people the time to heal.
Right.
We just want to, again, Band-Aid.
And Bill.
Oh my God, I just want to
just
throw up.
sad.
Can we just put together, like, can we have
Our
universal
own
stuff?
Yeah.
Can we just do our own?
Yeah, for real.
Yeah. Healthcare's a right.
It's
Which
a mess.
we will. We
are. We're getting there. We're working on
there.
some stuffs.
We got secrets.
Yeah, we do.
Big stuff. big stuff.
Which is exciting. Wow. So that, I think, is one of the things that I kind of wanted to like bring, you know, at least to this equation as far as like trauma. And so what would fix it, right? Like, we know what's wrong. We see it in pockets, you know, everywhere we go, whether it's provider agencies or even drop-ins and stuff. Like, no offense, guys. Like, I've seen some of these drop-ins out here. I ran one in Michigan that was amazing, and it's rough. It's not happening the way it should be because everybody's judgmental. And that is like the key element in all of this is that judgment. And even if you're not being judgmental, we think you are. So it's like you have to go out of your way to create that brave space, to do as much as you can to promote safety and promote trust and promote inclusion, and inclusion in the regard of like letting people who use these systems design these systems and help with these systems.
And not the ones that just design the way you like, right? And because like, let them think outside the box, like the ones using it, and, you know, which is often part of the barrier too. The ones using it are modeling after the ones supporting them, and giving, you know, oh, I don't want to lose or damage this relationship, so their way must be the right way. Therefore, I will help design it to fit their
what they
needs, right? Meet theirs or meet their ideas.
Yeah.
It's that's a big deal.
Just while I was educating myself about trauma, I wanted to comment on some of the different kinds of trauma, because there's so much misunderstanding around this. I thought it might be worthwhile to look at various kinds of trauma.
And maybe we'll do a little trauma aware statement right now, because I don't know what's on the paper. And so, you know, in these podcasts,
activation warning,
we talk about tough stuff. And so we
Mhm.
just want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And if you ever feel activated, there's, you know, Organ Rompery Warm Line, which is an amazing warm line to be able to find support, as well as a million other national resources when you're seeking support. So yeah, go right ahead.
David Rompery, Organ.
David
Warm
Rompery,
Line.
yeah, Organ Warm Line.
Well, so let's see. When they're thinking about classification of trauma, there are things like shock trauma, so accidents, natural disasters, things of that nature.
Pandemics.
Yes,
Yep.
pandemics. Pandemics.
Mask wearing.
We're in one.
I am such a traumatized by the masks. People don't understand when you've been smothered, you don't want to wear a mask on your face, right?
You had an excellent solution though, the clear.
The clear
I think
but I was
face
told that I
shield.
had to take it off at one event. Yeah, they were just like, nope, you can't wear that particular one. I'm like, I teach, and you're telling me I cannot wear this mask. It works, and anyway,
So interesting. Okay.
It just depends on who and where you go.
Yeah. Well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate. Relational trauma. So chronic adversity, a lack of safety, sometimes even abuse and neglect. And then other experiences. So childhood medical procedures.
Dentists.
Yes,
I had 4 teeth out as a child, and I was traumatized by. To this day, I can't go in a dentist without having severe sweats. My heart palpitates.
Wow, it's a very common
was it
thing.
the old DHS, like public services dentists?
I'm assuming
that's what mine was too, and it was traumatic.
Yeah, they pulled out 4 teeth, and it was not. Anyway, go ahead. Yeah, I know it's horrible, but people don't think about that. As traumatic. So
so adverse community environments makes me think a lot about some of the gang life that is so prevalent these days for our youth, especially. And then intergenerational trauma, which they've kind of a hot topic these days, and we're finding that this is just phenomenal to me. But of our human genome, it seems to be only 2% of the genes that are actually 2% of the genetic material that is coding for genes, and 98% of the human genome is involved in this epigenetic process. So things that are turning genes, 98% of the genes are used to turn other genes on and off, or code for scaling things up or down, or off or on, and which can happen in these traumatic states.
And so it's passed through epigenetics.
These right, and then those genetics can be passed down. I think up to 3 generations, actually, up to 3 generations, and they've done experiments on poor little tiny mammals where they might teach one rat, somehow they might teach a rat to be afraid of something whenever it touches a red circle or whatever, it gets a buzz, and they can find 2 generations later that
they're still scared.
The mice are scared of that.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's amazing. It's amazing. It's amazing. And so just even more striking to me that this was not integral to my healthcare training.
For real.
And another sign that we're really probably missing something very, very big. 90, we're missing 98% of it, guys.
Yeah, we are.
I think
we're missing 98% of it. By focusing on the 2%. By focusing on the 2%.
Absolutely. Something that I think about too in here is just like, it wasn't until very recently. I actually had like a super emotional response when I found this out. But, we've got the fight, flight, or freeze. That's what it was forever. And then it became the fight, flight, freeze, or faint response. And now it's the fight, flight, freeze, faint, or fawn response. And my name's Fawn, guys, and so I just thought that was weird. I heard it and I was like, Fawn, that's weird. And I started to read it, and it kind of jacked me up. I actually called Angel, and I was really upset about it because it just really, it spoke to me so much. Because for anybody who doesn't know what the fawn response is, it's when you're a kid and everything's out of your control and parents are, out of control. A lot of times these children in this equation will, they don't want CPS to get called. So they make sure that mom's not sleeping on the steps wasted, or whatever. They make sure the kids get their hair brushed in the morning and, get off to school, because if they go to school and they look messy, then a teacher might call CPS, so it trains these children to just be hyper vigilant and fixers. And, anytime anybody's uncomfortable, they're caretakers, they're fixers. And not that that's a bad thing to be a caretaker, but when you literally are visceral, that's who you are, that is highly stressful on your brain and your body. I know, because I have it. I'm always that person who's trying to fix something or trying to ease somebody else's pain, ease somebody else's burden. And I read that, and I just I called Angel and just kind of went, just like
Yeah.
broke down
Wow.
because I just never looked at it like that. I knew I had traumas. I didn't know that had built me as much as it had, into who I am.
Well, and
Um,
it prevents you from learning or feeling safe enough to set personal boundaries.
Totally.
You
become a doormat.
Or limits
Yeah.
to how much, and then have a balance for self-care or care for
Mhm.
self. And then so you're in this kind of default to rescuer mode, which helping people is a great skill and quality about people. But when it goes over and beyond, and then to avoid self, it creates this kind of what you see dictates what you do, in turn is what you get. That comes from IPS, and it becomes the default.
Yeah.
And then when that default kind of doesn't go so well, then you flip to either a person.
Then it's a super meltdown.
A person might flip defaults to victim or persecutor.
fight.
So the persecutor, the victim,
It's true.
and the rescuer kind of triangle, historically known as the victim shame cycle, but that sounds shaming and blaming. So we're not talking about people. We're talking about survival skills and default places
Yourself.
when you get really uncomfortable. And that's been talked about for decades and decades. So
but you'd surprise how many rooms feel like, they're hearing it for the first time.
Exactly.
When we talk about
every
it.
time we talk about it, it was like people were like, whoa. So putting together kind of in layman's terms, we put together this, partnership, like it was very heterosexual kind of mindset. It was a man and a woman, but any partnership, having a dialogue, and just you could see where they flipped from persecutor, rescuer, victim, and all they're doing is having a 5-minute conversation about Johnny has skinned his knee, and the steak got burnt, and he works all the time for the steak and to bring home steak, and she's home all the time. It was just this amazing way to just illustrate real life scenarios, to go inward and go, maybe these are reactive patterns, rather than how can we recognize these reactive patterns and push the pause button and go, how do we do something different? Same with the fawn response. It's like, or the fight, flight, freeze, or faint response. If you look at it, those are reactions. I keep saying response. Those are actually reactions to fear, and reactions sometimes from activated trauma, and become patterned. And when we're in this pattern, how do we recognize the pattern, push the pause, and then learn to respond and do something responsive rather than reactive?
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and that's what I'm learning about myself, with this. I mean, 100% with Angel's help, because she's always like reminding me and creating platforms for empowerment where I can, be that person. But every time, since I've known what this fawn response was, and since I recognized it, every time I lay a hard boundary, like every time I put a boundary in place and I feel that fawn response when, the opposing person is like, well, actually, this is kind of what we're going to do. That's what happens in my brain is either I go, oh, okay, cool, whatever you want. Or I'm like, I'm instantly, I go right to like this fight response, and so what I've been trying to do is be, firm in my boundaries. And then when the opposing body accepts that, I'm like, oh my goodness, that feels so good. And you forget, you're like, I'm just so used to being like, sure, we can do whatever you want, babe. That when you actually lay down a boundary that's healthy, you feel so good afterwards. And that's why that's why this trauma healing is so important, counteracting those norms that are, within us, because you do feel empowered and you do feel stronger. And you're like, oh my gosh, I did that.
Yep. Self-affirming.
Yeah, it is. And it's a self-awareness.
It's funny that you brought up that we're kind of wove in boundaries, because people often who have trauma either relinquish their or don't have boundaries, or they relinquish their power, or they take power as a survival mechanism. And so being able to educate people on how to just be able to say, and be okay and not feel guilty about setting
Mhm.
a boundary. Cause I know that I often would struggle with setting
Me
a
too.
boundary because I want to support others before I support
Yeah.
myself. And so I found this meme just recently on Facebook. It says, boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously.
I like
And
it.
I'm like, oh my God, I can just say
I
that.
like it.
So when I am getting ready to set a boundary, I might say, read something like that. I'm going to set a boundary, and it's a way for me to love you and to love myself at the same time, and maybe get a different response, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the other person then might hear that, might not. Because often when people are pushing or not used to us having boundaries
Right.
or being reactive, and now we're trying to be responsive, they don't know how to act.
Yeah.
Or they don't like it because
Yeah.
it's making them
It's stressful,
uncomfortable,
yeah.
or they're not
they have
getting
a
their
need
need
that they
met,
think is not,
right?
yes, not
Right,
being
right.
met, and that's the only thing that's important to them at the time.
At the time,
I
yeah.
really like that, Angel.
Yeah.
Isn't it nice? Yeah, I love that
Mhm.
too.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that we decided to talk about this today because it's so at the core, just of everything that we do, at Aware. And, after 2 years of COVID and all the things, and we're really, really seeing how hurt communities are, all of them.
Yeah.
All of them,
Yep.
from the people who are sleeping in front of the Chase Bank downtown to, the people who've been working this entire time, to support hospitals and clinics and all of these, things. So recognizing that it's prevalent and that we probably all have it, providing things like voice and choice.
Self-actualization, self-determination, all of the things. Just another quick example of, this pandemic. Okay. So going from being very highly socialized to very isolated, because now I was living by myself after being a mother for 30 years and married forever and a day, and then single. A year later, the pandemic happened. So I'm in this place all by myself. And it was like, I found myself on Zoom after Zoom after Zoom for work. But what I was missing was the energy and that I needed,
in the room.
that I feel from other people to kind of help. But even still, then moving to Arizona and having a very different culture than Oregon and belief system, and the way they operate in the world, versus Oregon. Coming back to Oregon 8 times throughout this last year and a half really was just traumatic, just transitioning, because I go from this very free place that I'm living with the sun and the water and the warmth and all the things that help me thrive. No masks, unless you chose to go to some casino or something, they would require that, but no mask wearing, no fear mongering, all of the things and I'm not taking away I'm not saying one way or another about COVID. What I'm saying is the cultures were very different. The society was operating very different. The media is very different. And then coming to Oregon, having to be forced to wear this mask again and to go out into the public, I found myself not wanting to go out again. And then it's more raining and more, all of the things.
Weather.
So it was compiling. And I felt myself going from really excited, and I started getting lower energy, more stress. And then I started to become angry. And I'm not an angry person, but I'm angry when I'm starting to suppress things or being controlled in a way that doesn't fit what helps me thrive and feel well. So I'm leaving in a couple weeks to get out of Oregon for a little while.
Go get some Florida sun.
Go get a little Florida sun, some little Arizona sun, and come back.
Yes, you'll be relieved you won't have to wear a mask in Florida either.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Florida, Texas, Arizona, no mask wearing.
Well, as a physician, let me say I'm pretty glad that somebody thought of the idea of masks.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Definitely. Masks, washing your hands.
Definitely washing hands.
Basic stuff, guys. Basic stuff. Vaccines, not to be controversial, but people aren't dropping dead of polio anymore, guys.
Well, I agree with that factor.
Yeah, or meningococcal disease.
Yeah, that'll be another podcast.
I guess the only thing about those is that it's created so much division because it's become so political, and
It
that's
has.
what's heartbreaking.
It has.
It
Well,
has.
and just to be like flat out honest, 9 months of clinical trials doesn't make me comfortable. That's why I said maybe we'll do another podcast.
Yeah.
That's fine. Vaccines have been around for a year, 40, 50 years. So.
Yeah, I'm not anti-vax.
Yeah.
I'm anti-trial on error in a short amount of time.
Yes, same here.
And forced.
Yeah.
Forced.
Yes, me too. Me too.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, mandating.
But it is
mandating people to
definitely
do
traumatic. The
Yeah,
whole lot of
the
it.
whole-
Definitely,
It's just
yes.
like I don't even talk to people. I'm like, no, none of your business.
It's been.
I don't care what you think, and
It's
I
been
don't.
very. It's been very difficult. It's been very difficult. I mean, which is why we're having these these explosions of mental issues with mental wellness and substance use.
Yeah, people are
in a profound
it's coming out their neck
state of
sideways.
suffering. Yeah,
Stress.
yes, and this pandemic did not do us any favors across the globe. I think we'll find. Yeah.
Agreed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, how would we like to wrap this up?
We'll be sure to put disclaimers on the
activation
editorial. Like, we are not opposed or against those disclaimers.
No, never politics ever.
Yeah.
No
we
politics.
Just want to be aware.
We're just
We
being
just wanna
aware.
be aware.
No pun intended.
Right.
Or pun intended.
Or pun intended.
We just want to be aware. Advocacy, wellness, action, recovery, and education.
That's it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, awesome. Do you want to take us out?
Yeah.
I don't.
What's coming up next, guys?
What is our next topic?
Well, I think next we're going to
you know what
have
our
a
next topic
we're gonna have a discussion. Our next podcast number 8, guys, with Aware is legalize it, don't criticize it.
Is that going to get some blood boiling for some people?
Well, I think again, we hope so.
We hope so.
We just want to have an honest conversation about things that we need to talk about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, look for us.
Where can they find us?
Well, look for us, guys.
YouTube, LinkedIn,
Instagram, Facebook. Talkcast PDX.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Shout out to Talkcast
Shout
PDX.
Out. Yo, Justin and Dave Dahl and Tim Sagnan. Is that how you call it?
Yeah, last name. Yes, we're very happy to be here.
Happy to be here. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right.
All right. Till next time, guys.
Until next time.
Have a great week.